Recently, I put out a video discussing why manga is killing American comics. Link to that video is in the description box down below. One of the issues that I briefly mentioned was how manga usually tells very linear stories, centered on a core group of characters, in comparison to American comics, which even hardcore fans of Marvel and DC will admit are very chaotic and hard to follow. They're kind of all over the place. In this video, I want to delve into this particular problem with American comics more in depth. Comic books, specifically superhero comics, and more specifically DC and Marvel, have been around for many decades. In that time, there have been a lot of characters created, a lot of storylines that have started and ended, and if any comic book fan is being honest, trying to keep up with everything going on in these fantastic worlds can be an absolute nightmare. Not to mention, very expensive. Keeping up with comics is difficult for even the most die-hard fans, let alone someone who is just starting to get into reading DC or Marvel. Now, let me state for the record, I do not consider myself to be a die-hard comic book reader. I'm not rushing to the comic book shop to pick up every single thing that DC or Marvel puts out. One of the reasons for that is because my wallet would be screaming for me to stop. The other is because there isn't enough time for me to really invest in trying to read everything that the big two have to offer. Also, let me state for the record, I haven't bought a new comic for around 5 years or so. But if you want to understand why that's the case, then again, check out the video I did on manga versus comics down in the description box below. But even when I was buying comics, I was only doing so for certain heroes that were my favorite. There were just way too many heroes to keep up with, way too many plot lines to follow, which admittedly did make it difficult when a crossover event would come along and I haven't read all the tie-in issues. And to be honest with you, I can't imagine the level of money and dedication that it takes to buy and read everything that these companies put out. It's just too much. As it stands, April 2023, there is an estimated 7,000 Marvel comic book characters, and there are even more DC characters, with the number estimated to be over 10,000. Now, given not all of those are heroes, some are secondary characters, supporting cast, and characters that are no longer in use, but still, that's a lot. Even if we just say that among the heroes, not including anyone else in the story, there are maybe, 1,000 heroes, or hell, even 500 heroes per comic book company. That's still way too many heroes. Instead of keeping the focus to, let's just say, 100 core heroes to make up your universe, these companies have simply continued to add on, not realizing that quantity does not equal quality. And the situation gets worse when you realize how many variants there are of certain heroes. I've lost count of how many Spider-Man exist at this point. Now, don't get me wrong, I love superheroes as much as the next guy, but there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. Too much candy will give you diabetes. Too much food will make you fat. At some point, you need to stop and realize that what you need is not more of something, but better quality of what you already have. Trying to keep up with all of these heroes and connect the dots between these different storylines and how they weave together, for crossover events especially, well, I think this meme sums up my thoughts very well.
Ain't nobody got time for that!
And this is where manga succeeds over American comics. Most manga focuses on a core group of characters with a supporting cast, of course, that follows a, for the most part, very linear storyline that is usually confined to the manga itself. Now, of course, sometimes mangas do add external novels, movies, and so on, but none of that is usually necessary for the reader to understand the story of the manga itself. You can just start from volume 1 and read to volume whatever, and you can understand the story just fine. Now, there have been crossovers with other manga series and anime and games, but these are usually just for fun and not meant to be taken seriously. Also, the fact that each manga is in its own self-contained universe really does help. Naruto, One Piece, Bleach, Dragon Ball, these are all just part of the magazine known as Shonen Jump, but they don't all exist in a singular Shonen Jump universe. They're all disconnected and focused on telling their own story. I don't need to read Dragon Ball to understand Naruto, for example. And that makes being a fan of these series so much easier and also so much cheaper. I get great quality stories with characters that I love, and I don't need them all tying together in a big, complex web. So, am I saying that the idea of a shared universe for comic book heroes is a bad idea? That Superman and Batman should exist in entirely different universes, for example? Well, no, I'm not. See, Western superhero comics have had a shared universe for a very long time, and in my opinion, that is part of the appeal of Western comics. Knowing that these diverse and varied heroes exist together in one crazy reality is fun and cool, and I wouldn't change that. So that being said, what is the solution? Well, I think we've already seen it both on the big screen and in comics. The MCU, at least until Phase 4, would give most of the heroes their own movies that followed their own separate storylines, with little nuggets of clues and hints towards a larger part of the MCU, usually in post-credit scenes. These storylines would eventually intersect into an Avengers movie, but I would argue that you could watch the Avenger films on their own without needing to see every other MCU movie. Same as you could watch the Thor films without needing to watch Captain America, for example. It made the MCU really accessible, something which Disney and Marvel apparently stopped caring about with Phase 4. And then we have, for my second example, the Ultimate Universe in Marvel Comics. The idea behind the Ultimate Universe, at least in the beginning, was to take Marvel's most iconic characters back to basics and keep things simple. Sure, all the heroes shared a universe, but for the most part, their stories played out individually, and the shared universe was more so of a backdrop than anything else. Unfortunately, towards the end of the Ultimate Universe, things kind of went off the rails, to say the least, and it was ultimately canceled. Pun partially intended. Some of its elements eventually combined into the main Marvel universe, and the rest is history. It was a great idea, probably my favorite continuity in comics, which is why it was such a shame to see it go south and to eventually see it canceled. I believe both Marvel and DC need to reboot their universes once again, and this time adopt the initial idea of the Ultimate Universe, but for their mainline universes. Easy to follow storylines for each hero. Acknowledge that they do exist in a universe with other heroes, but have their individual storylines self-contained to their specific line of comics, with crossover events happening very rarely, maybe every 5 or 10 years. That way, if you come into Marvel and all you want to read is Spider-Man, then you start with Spider-Man number 1 and just continue from there to whatever the current issue of Spider-Man is, and that's all you need to know what is happening with Spider-Man. Same thing goes for X-Men. Start with X-Men 1 and go from there. Any comments or indications of other heroes or plot lines would just be there for the die-hard fans. Rewards, Easter eggs that they would recognize if they read other comics in the universe, but not anything that would impact the primary story going on in that particular comic that you're reading at that time. And when we do crossover events, have them done in a way to where you just have to buy the crossover event comics. You don't need to buy a specific issue of Batman to understand the plot line of a particular crossover event, for example. No, everything that you need to know for that crossover event is in the comic book line of that crossover event. The second thing that needs to happen is a purge of both universes. There are just way too many heroes and villains who no one knows about, and more importantly, no one cares about. I think DC and Marvel should get their roster of heroes down to the 100 most well-known heroes in each company. So around 100 heroes for Marvel, 100 heroes for DC, and of course their accompanying rogues gallery and supporting cast, and focus on developing these core characters and making them the best characters they can be. If you do add new heroes or new villains, then do it slowly over time and only keep them around if they are actually able to pick up steam with the audience. You can't force a hero to become as popular as Spider-Man or Batman, no matter how hard you try. No matter how hard you talk down to your fans, you cannot force popularity. It's a process which must happen over time, naturally with the readers. You don't get to decide as a writer whether something becomes popular or not. The customer does. Also, we don't need, for example, a comic book for every member of the X-Men. Just have an X-Men line of comics and focus on the members of that team within that one line. Cyclops doesn't need his own line of comics. Wolverine doesn't need his own line of comics. If you want a story centered on a particular character, then devote specific issues of that line to a specific character, not create an entirely different line of comics. Same thing goes, for example, in Batman. Nightwing does not need his own comic. He's a Batman character. Focus on developing him in the Batman comic book line. And if you do give someone their own spin-off title, have a damn good reason for it. A major change in the character's life that sets up things to where it makes sense for them to get their own comic book line, such as if Tim Drake stops being Batman's sidekick and goes off to lead the Teen Titans in a new universe. You start a new Teen Titans comic book line. That makes a lot of sense, but as long as he's a sidekick to Batman, he doesn't need his own line of comics. Keep him and his story in the Batman line. Keep it simple. And finally, the last solution that I would suggest is stop creating so many variants of these heroes. There are way too many Spider-Men and Spider-Women. I get it, multiverses are fun, but they have been abused so much by Marvel and DC. Look, alternate universes should be used for fun, one-shot comics or for limited runs, and stop making alternate universes for every random what-if scenario that goes through your head. For example, Injustice, an alternate universe where Superman turns evil and becomes a dictator. Great idea, fans love it. An alternate universe where some no-name person gets spider powers from something other than a random mutated spider bite. That's lame, no one cares, and it diminishes the specialness of Peter becoming Spider-Man. There needs to be a filter for good ideas for alternate universes and shit ideas for alternate universes. Multiverses are not in and of themselves bad, but writers need to stop abusing them because it's fucking lazy. And so that's it. If you want to bring order to the chaos in American comics, you need a reboot. You need a rethinking of how these universes are written. You need a purge of the roster, and you need to simplify all of it and make it more linear and self-contained. But hey, what do I know? I'm just some nerd on the internet. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Be sure to tell me your thoughts on this topic down below, and if you like what you saw, hit the like button, click the bell, and be sure to subscribe and share the content so more people can enjoy it as well. If you want early access to videos like this, consider becoming a patron on Patreon for only $3 a month. I've started to see some promising signs of growth from this channel, and I would love to make videos for you guys full time, so the Patreon will definitely help. And if you're feeling extra generous, I have a PayPal, Cash App, and Venmo. The information for all of this is in the description box down below. Also, I have other channels such as my gaming channel, so if you're interested in that, check them out. Again, thanks for watching, and this is JeskerJames with a Z, signing out.